us now for an author chat. She's going to tell us a little bit about herself and her books before we get going.
Hi, hello, I'm Elly Griffiths. Happy Halloween to you all. I always dress like this, actually, so it's not special for Halloween. So I'm Elly Griffiths. I'm the author of the Dr. Ruth Galloway mysteries. There are 12 of them now, and I've just written number 13. And I guess they have Ruth is a forensic archaeologist, and she's involved with the police when they investigate crimes. But there's always a sort of historical, mythological, slightly spooky angle to them, probably embodied in the person of Cathbad, a druid who is a main character in the books. But a couple of years ago, I also did a standalone book called The Stranger Diaries, which starts with a spooky story being told on Halloween. So I kind of think that's my sort of Halloween book, really. But my most recent book is The Postscript Murders, Postscript Murders, which came out in October, 1st of October. And it's a murder mystery with a group of characters who, possibly slightly unlikely characters, to investigate the murder of a 90-year-old woman who dies in her seaside apartment. And everyone thinks it's natural causes. But then it turns out that this woman, Peggy, is known as a murder consultant, helping writers come up with murders. So her carer, her 80-year-old neighbour Edwin, and the guy who runs the coffee stall decide to solve the murder, to the annoyance of Harbinder Kaur, who is the detective who is really solving the murder. And she's a character who was also in The Stranger Diaries. I also write a children's series called A Girl Called Justice, murder mysteries for 11-year-olds. And the most recent one of that, which will be out next year, is called The Ghost in the Garden. So, there's a certain ghosty feel to some of my books.
There's the Stephens and Mephisto series as well, isn't there? That's got a great,
well, thank you. I'd totally forgotten those. So thank you, Caroline, for reminding me. So there are also 5 Stephens and Mephisto stories, which, definitely have a ghostly, otherworldly feel, because they're about a magician called Max Mephisto and a policeman called Edgar Stephens, who in the war served together in a shadowy unit known as the Magic Men. And the series has now come up to 1964, was the last book, which is called Now You See Them. And I'm currently writing number 6, which is called The Midnight Hour. So they are quite spooky, and also they're to do with magic and misdirection and never quite believing what you see and all those things which are quite mysterious. The publishers now call them the Brighton Mysteries, which is really good, actually, because when they call them Stephens and Mephisto, you couldn't shorten them to S&M. Or maybe you could. Maybe you could. Maybe have got more readers. S&M or M&S. It's a different market.
Maybe. Tell us a little bit about the inspiration for the Postscript Murders and the Murder Consultant, because you've got a really nice story about who that's based on.
Well, yes. So my Aunt Marge, some of you will know, she's been a big influence and support for me with the Norfolk books, because until very recently she lived in Norfolk, and it was really sort of childhood holidays with Aunt Marge that made me fall in love with Norfolk. And Marge also knows lots about Norfolk history. She's got a boat, so when I was researching the Janus Stone, the kind of chase on the boat, trust me, it's more exciting than it sounds. I did that with Marge on her boat, so we traced every sort of step of it. You can have a step on a boat, so she's been super helpful. But a couple of years ago, Marge moved down south to be near us, also to be near her son, who lives in Portsmouth. And she bought a lovely retirement flat in Seaford. And it's one of those lovely blocks. It's a 20s block, and she looks straight out onto the promenade and the sea. It's a beautiful view. Something about that view, I don't know, maybe it was the sea air, maybe it's the vantage point, made Marge kind of obsessed with murder. And she always has rung me on a Sunday. It's the sort of thing she does. But now when she rings on a Sunday, it's like, oh, hello, love. Oh, I've just seen a vicar. And I was just thinking, could you kill somebody with incense? And you think, oh, maybe you could. Or she'd say, I've just seen a couple. I don't think they're married, but they meet every day at 5 o'clock. And I'm just watching to see who they go home with. So she is watching everything and basically thinking of crimes. So I thought, What if there was an elderly lady, very innocent looking, very respectable looking? Marge is an ex-maths teacher, and as we all know, maths teachers are above suspicion. Teachers generally, Caroline. But, what if there was a very respectable woman living in a retirement flat, but what if her job was murder consultant? What if her job was thinking up ways to kill people? So that was the start of this book, and Marge really was the inspiration for Peggy Smith, the lady in the book. Though I have to say, Marge is alive and well and living in Gosport and fine.
Does she like that she's the inspiration for the book? Does she know?
She does know. She does really like it. She really likes. She likes the notice she gets. Sort of that people know of her, sort of Aunt Marge. And one of the Ruth books, I think it was House at Sea's End, she did come up with a murder for that, and it was the death of somebody in a stair lift. And I used it in the book, and it had a really good review. I think it was from Barry Forshaw in the FT, and he said it was the nastiest use of a stair lift he'd ever heard of. And Marge was so proud of that. She actually had it framed. So she loved that, she loved it. And because in the book I did credit her with that murder. So yeah, she's quite proud of her reputation as a murder consultant.
So Stranger Diaries, that started off Harbinder, and her things, features a great kind of gothic spooky house that's a school, and a story that I absolutely believed was real. All the way through, to the point that I wanted to buy the stories by the person. Can you tell us a little bit more about the kind of ghost story author you created?
Yes, I'm so pleased about that, Caroline. Thank you. Yes, so for a long time I've been wanting to write a kind of Gothic book, really. I love Victorian Gothic. Wilkie Collins is my favourite writer, but I also love sort of M.R. James and people like that. So I love that sort of story, but I didn't really want to write a historical novel. So I wasn't quite sure how to do it. But then I thought of the idea of setting the book in a school, a modern day school that had once been the home to a made up writer who I called R.M. Holland. I'll tell you something a bit more about that later. That's turned out to be quite strange, but anyhow, so I called him R.M. Holland, and the idea was that the book would start with this ghost story, supposedly written by R.M. Holland, but obviously actually written by me. And as the book goes through, you hear bits more about the story, and at the end you have all of it. And actually it's based on a story that I used to tell my kids, because we used to walk home from school past a little bit of sort of wasteland, and I always used to tell them this ghost story. And I must be a horrible person, because I loved how scared they were. And I do remember telling it, they had a Halloween party when they were about sort of 9-ish, and they invited sort of friends from school, and I told this story, and they were by then quite proud that I could tell this scary story. But one of the girls didn't sleep for a week, so I felt terrible. So yes, it's made up by me, this ghost story. It's called The Stranger, hence The Stranger Diaries. But the funny thing is, the book is set sort of in West Sussex, near a little town called Stenning. And Stenning has a lovely bookshop who's always been very supportive to me, and it's mentioned in the book. Also, just outside Stenning is this very spooky, empty cement factory, which also features in the book. So I'd made up the school, and I'd given it a Holland house, because that's where R.M. Holland used to live. But then when I was doing a signing at Stenning Books, some teachers from Stenning Grammar came in, and they said, "Did you know that we had a Holland house?" And I didn't. And I've never been to Stenning Grammar. But they said they couldn't believe it. They thought it was their school. So that's very strange, isn't it? It goes to show you can make something up, and it turns out to be real. But the actual school, I think, is kind of, obviously it's made up, but it's slightly based on my own school, which was a big comprehensive in Hove, modern comprehensive, but that had actually also been part of it was an old building. And funny enough, the US cover of The Stranger Diaries is different from the British cover, has a school on it that looks just like my old school. So I did have a sort of, when I saw it, it was so strange. I haven't got it here, but if you look it up, it really does look like Cardinal Newman. Did you check if it was? I did, and it's not. I did check where it was, but it was just a kind of a Victorian house that they'd found, but it so looked like my old school, and everyone I know who went to that school, and because I kind of live where I grew up, my kids went to the same school, and they immediately recognized it. Oh my gosh, it's Cardinal Newman. And in fact, my school had a ghost story. Of course, you expect every school to have a ghost story. And because mine was a Catholic school that had once been a convent, they had a story about a ghostly nun. And, you know, you would be disappointed if you went to school and there wasn't a ghostly nun. So, yeah, so I gave the school in my book a ghost story as well, a bit like the nun.
How hard was it writing in a different voice? Because you created like the Victorian kind of author, and obviously did it so well that I completely believed it was someone else. How hard was it to do that?
I really liked it. I think because I love sort of Victorian literature. I did a master's in Victorian literature years ago, so I really love it. So I really enjoyed setting myself that challenge. I probably would not have been able to keep it going over a whole book, but for a short story it was quite good fun. And also the thing is, if you're writing that sort of story, you can say things like, he remembered that terrible night. Little had he known when he started on the journey. All those things, whereas if, say, in the Ruth books, they're written in the present tense, close third person. You can't really get away with that sort of slight hamminess. And I really, really liked that sort of ending little sections with things like, listen, how the wind howls. You know, you've got to have fun with that, really, haven't you?
Yeah. Sam asks, you must have had so many memorable moments so far. What stands out for you?
Oh, hi, Sam. Memorable moments as a writer, I guess, because I've had, obviously, both of my children's obviously my most memorable moment. But, well, this year has been such a strange old year, hasn't it? Because we've all been locked down, and I normally do, last year, I did over 60 events, live events. That's more than one a week. So I'm used to doing lots of events. So this year has been kind of really strange. But one thing that really struck for me this year was winning the Edgar, which is the big American crime fiction prize, and The Stranger Diaries won Best Novel. And it was a strange old thing, really, because of course I had my seat on the plane booked. You know, I was planning to go over for the ceremony. I had bought a dress and everything, and that couldn't happen. So I was actually at home in my shed, which is where I am now. And I'd got the timing wrong, so I didn't realize it was going on then. And my phone was across the other side of the shed, just plugged in, charging, and it suddenly started buzzing. And I realized that I'd won the Edgar. So that was a strange and surreal moment, but it was a highlight of this year, definitely.
Because at the start of the year when we could travel, you were on a book tour then, weren't you? Because I think I came to see you at an event.
I was. It was lovely to see you and David and Linda in Leeds Waterstones. Yeah. And at the time when I saw the schedule that the publishers had done, because it was a 2-week tour for the launch of the Lantern Men, and I was doing 3 events a day over 2 weeks, and it started off in Norfolk and ended up in Edinburgh. So it was a really full on. But now I'm so glad I did it, because, you know, I sort of did loads of events, and it was great. And I also got to see friends like you who I wouldn't have seen otherwise. And in fact, in Leeds, I saw another friend of mine, Jeff, and his wife, and, you know, I wouldn't have seen them otherwise. So that was really great. Also caught up with my aunt who lives in Durham, and she's the daughter of Dennis Laws, who's my grandfather, who is the inspiration for the Magic Men books, because he was an actor and comedian. So I haven't seen Corinne for a long time, so got to see her and her daughter, my cousin. So it was actually, I'm so glad I did it. Yeah, but doesn't it seem a long time ago? It seems like a different world in a way.
I know. So yeah, it doesn't feel like this year, does it?
Does not feel like this year. No, it's strange, really.
Tell us a little bit about Dennis Laws then, and your Stevens and Mephisto series.
Well, so Stevens and Mephisto, for a long time, I kind of wanted to write a different sort of book, and I'd written about sort of 5 Ruth books at this time. And I'd wanted to write about sort of music hall and variety. And the reason for that is that my grandfather, Dennis, he was in that world. He was a musical comedian, and he had a really interesting life, Dennis. He served in the First World War. He was in the RFC, the Royal Flying Corps. Didn't really talk about, I mean, he lied about his age to join up, actually, so he was very young when he joined up. Didn't really talk about his service at all, but one thing he did say to my mum and to me was, he said, after everything I saw in the war, there was only one job I could do, and that was to become a comedian. And that's what he did. And he travelled around, so he travelled around the country, different town every week. One week he'd be in Leeds, and he'd be in Scarborough, then he'd be in Bournemouth, you know, just travelling around like that. Along the way, he got married, and he married my grandmother, who was called Elly Griffiths, because I took her name as a pseudonym, and they had a child, my mum Sheila. And then my grandmother left my grandfather, and unusually for the time, but unusually even for now, really, she left the baby with him. And my mum didn't see her again till she was 18. And so my grandfather brought her up, and that was her life too, traveling around, you know, a different town every week. And eventually he sent her to boarding school, which she hated. But what that is the inspiration for my justice books about a girl who's sent to boarding school for the first time, aged 11. So I was really close to my granddad, who's a lovely man. And if you look on my Facebook page at the moment, I've got a picture of him, because I'm going to be reading the first of those books aloud on my Elly Griffiths Facebook. And he was such a handsome, dashing man, handsome even when he was an older man. But when he died, he left me his playbills. And I just became obsessed with the names on them. They were things like Lou Lenny and her unrideable mule. I mean, you know, what's that about? Was it a real mule? I don't know. Ray Deeney, the gay deceiver. No idea who he was or who he was deceiving. And I just wanted to write about these people. And Grandad was quite friendly with a magician called Jasper Maskelyne, who was super famous at the time. And in the Second World War, Jasper Maskelyne had been asked by Churchill to put together a group of magicians, and they were called the Magic Gang. And their job was to kind of use stage magic in the war effort, things like sort of camouflage and subterfuge and misdirection. So that is the backstory for Max Mephisto in my books, that in the war he'd been part of a group like that. So yeah, so there are now there are 5 books in the series. First is The Zigzag Girl, which I've got some. Actually, it's the American cover, but it's quite a cool cover actually. Zigzag Girl. First is The Zigzag Girl, and the most recent one is Now You See Them.
My dad says he loves the hat.
Oh, thank you, David. Yes, thank you. I'm thinking wearing it always, actually.
all future author events.
Yeah.
So Justice and the Mephisto series both have a little hint to your kind of life. What inspired Ruth?
Oh, well, Ruth was really inspired, partly by my husband, Andy, because so when I met Andy, he was working in the city. He was a lawyer, and he was working for a city bank. And, you know, she, you know, that was his life. You know, he worked in the city. And I remember meeting him in the city wine bar, and him saying, oh, you know, I didn't really want to be a lawyer. I wanted to be an archaeologist. And I thought, oh, that's so sweet. But then when we got married and we had children, he then said, do you remember that thing about being an archaeologist? I want to do it now. It seemed a bit less sweet. But he did. He went back to university and studied archaeology. So he became an archaeologist. And that's what gave me the idea for the Ruth books, really. She's a forensic archaeologist, which he isn't. But he introduced me to some amazing women who are forensic archaeologists. And really, that's where she came from. And I've told this story before, but maybe I'll just tell a quick version of it now. It really started walking across Titchwell Marsh on the North Norfolk coast. And Andy happened to say that prehistoric people thought marshland was sacred because it's neither land nor sea, but something in between. They thought of it as a kind of bridge to the afterlife. Neither land nor sea, neither life nor death. A liminal zone, an in-between place. And that's why you find bodies buried there. Sometimes, you know, treasure, sometimes weapons. It's to mark that boundary. And as soon as he said that, the whole idea for the crossing places, the first Ruth, came into my head. And I did sort of see her, and again, I feel this is a bit corny, but I did sort of see her walking towards me out of the mist, you know, and I felt I knew everything about her in that instant. I have to say, she's not me. People do think that she is me, but she's really not. For a start, you know, she's an academic and I'm not. She's an atheist and I'm not. She's an archaeologist and I'm not. Also, she's very introspective and I'm not. She doesn't, not very sociable. All those things. And obviously there are bits of her in me, like I like Bruce Springsteen and Cats. But, you know, actually she's probably more like Andy, come to think of it. I think in terms of the books, so that the police detective in them is called Nelson. I think probably I'm more like Nelson and Andy's more like Ruth.
Really? There's such rich characters in that series. How do you keep track of like all their details across the books?
Well, it is, you know, it has become more of a challenge than I thought it would be, because of course at first I didn't think there would be such a long series, and you know, I've just written book 13, as I think I said earlier, that's coming out next year, so I never realized I'd have to keep track of them to that extent. So I've got my notebook here. This is the notebook that I always use. Well, every time I start a new notebook I do this again. So if you see, I write down at the front all the dates and when every character was born. So I've got that, you know, that timeline clear. Just write it out by hand at the front of each notebook. So I try and keep it clear that way. I've got quite a good memory for that sort of stuff, to be honest with you. If any of my family were listening, which they're not, I don't think, they would be amazed to hear me say I've got a good memory, because I've got very bad memory for stuff that really, you know, like dentist appointments and what to buy at the shops and things like that, you know. But I have actually got quite a good memory for text. I still remember quite a lot of Macbeth, or the Scottish play that I did for O-level all those years ago. I remember loads of poetry off by heart and loads of Shakespeare, and I use quite a lot of those Shakespeare quotations in the Postscript Murders, actually, for the titles of the made-up books. So I've got a good memory for text, so I'm sure people can catch me out, but actually I'm quite good at remembering that sort of thing. Other things, not so much.
We've got one of our members called Charlotte McFall watching, and she lives in Pendle. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your book that you set there? Because I think she's asking me what witch you're dressed as, and she's given me two names, and I think they might be.
Oh, well, I think it's definitely going to be witches, hasn't it? If, in fact, Charlotte, I don't know if you read, there's a really good crime writer called Neil Lancaster. He's an ex-policeman, actually, and he writes the Tom Novak novels. So Neil's wife, Claire, is directly descended from Alice Nutter, one of the Pendle witches. Isn't that interesting? I only found that out today when I was chatting to Neil about something else, actually, and I said I was going to be doing this. Isn't that interesting? So Ruth number 5 is called Dying Fall. First 4 books are set in Norfolk, and I decided it was time to take Ruth on a little holiday. And Nelson comes from Blackpool. I chose Blackpool because it's a place I know quite well. My brother-in-law's from Blackpool, and also my granddad, the actor, always used to have a sort of Blackpool season, so we used to go and see him quite often. So I thought I'd set it in Blackpool. Ruth goes on holiday in Blackpool. Of course, she meets Nelson there, who is visiting his family. But for a sort of ghostly angle, I decided to include the Pendle witches, who are nearby on Pendle Hill in Lancashire, not that far from Blackpool. And so we went there, obviously, to research it. And there's a character in my book who lives in it's called Dame Alice's cottage, and it's a cottage that was owned by one of the Pendle witches, and it's a terrible story, really. It's in the 17th century, and it was a group of women, and there's a really good book, actually. It's called Wicked Enchantments, and it's about the Pendle witches. That and Mist Over Pendle is also another good one. It's a romance that was written at the time, but it's still quite interesting. So it was a kind of terrible story where these women, who were just wise women, in fact, ironically, wise women like that were often seen as protecting people against witches. So they were wise women. They were accused of witchcraft, and 10 of them were executed. And it was all to do as well with arguments over land and money, as so many things are. And really, they were accused of witchcraft. It was a really terrible thing. The interesting thing that I only found out very recently from another writer called Rowan Coleman, who writes as Bella Ellis these amazing books written about the Brontes, and the new one is called The Diabolical Bones. So you'll love that one, Caroline, I think. Anyhow, Rowan was telling me that there was a second Pendle witch trial only like 10 years after the first, but attitudes had changed so much that nobody was executed then. I think one person died in prison, but attitudes had changed so much in the course of it was only decades later. So yes, so that's the Pendle Witches and the Pendle Witch Trial. So it's a fascinating, there's a lovely song about it. I think, Charlotte, were you saying that you knew it? I won't sing it, but it's very deep in the local memory around there. And there's amazing place names, aren't there, like Fence and Crow Hill and Crow Lane, and really, it's Stump Hall Road is another really good one. So it's an amazing place, Pendle, Pendleton, and Pendle Hill. I think the guy who founded Quakerism as a religion had a vision of God on the top of Pendle Hill. So, and I do believe this, it's one of those places that is basically full of some sort of special power. I don't know if you think that, Charlotte, but I do think that.
It's shocking how many witch trials and things there were in the UK, isn't it? We think of it as being, like you read about the Salem ones.
Yes, it really is shocking. And of course, James I was kind of obsessed with witches, wasn't he? And there were lots of witch trials. And I think today is the anniversary of the first woman in Wales to be hanged as a witch. And, these were... the educated women, we know that because they often left writings and sort of spells, so we knew they could write and read. And as we all know, some people are very scared of educated women, and they were wise women, really, and it's just awful, really.
We've got a question on here that says, why do you choose to write under a pseudonym?
Oh, hi Sam. Well, as some of you will know, and I think most of my friends on the UK Crime Book Group know that Elly Griffiths isn't my real name. My real name is Domenica de Rosa. And as Domenica de Rosa, I did write 4 books. So when I first started writing, it was as Domenica de Rosa because, to be honest, it's a great name for organising my hair under my hat. To be honest, it's a very good name for a writer. And I think when I was growing up, I always wanted to be a writer. And I think that was something to do with having such a kind of romantic name. Domenica de Rosa is Italian. My dad was Italian, and it means Sunday of the Rose. It's kind of romantic. So my first 4 books were kind of all about sort of families, Italy, relationships, that sort of thing. And all published as Domenica de Rosa. But then when I wrote The Crossing Places, my then agent said to me, she said, it's crime. This is crime. You need a crime name. So not really thinking too much about it because, to be honest, I just assumed that I'd be picking this name for this one book. And that if I was ever published again, I'd go back to being, published as Domenica de Rosa. So as a lot of people do, I didn't realize it was quite as prevalent as it is, but I chose my grandmother's name, and she was called Elly Griffiths. And I didn't know my grandmother terribly well. She died when I was 5, and she didn't have a very happy life, actually. She was the one who'd left my grandfather, and, there was that sort of story to it. But the one thing I'd always heard about her was that she was a really intelligent woman, loved books, loved reading, but she'd had to leave school at 13 and go into service and become a maid. And I thought she would really like to have her name on a book. I'd wanted to be Ellen because that was her name, Elly Griffiths. And when the book came out, I saw I'd become Elly. So I did think to ask my publishers, Elly, and they said, yeah. They said, I think it just looks a bit tidier, really. So there you are. Elly, because it's a bit tidier. And I think they thought it was grittier and more crimey, and something that because I used to work in publishing, and something we always used to say there that, doesn't really bear much analysis, but we used to say that in a bookshop or a library, A is up there, Z's down there. What's on eye level? FGH. So we always used to try and advise any writer who wanted a pseudonym to go for an FGH name. So, Elly Griffiths has me there in the G's on eye level. Of course, it, depends how tall you are and all sorts of things, doesn't it? But there we are.
Sam says she likes both names.
Thank you, Sam.
My dad says that over 1,500 women were executed in total for witchcraft.
Isn't that an awful thing, really? You know, really awful. And it's so real, isn't it? I was talking about Macbeth earlier, and you know, we think Macbeth is, you know, is a play and it's a sort of fantasy, but that was so real to people, wasn't it? Witchcraft then. They really did believe in it, and just awful, awful things happened.
And we've got Lynn has joined the stream as
Oh,
well. And she's like a massive fan of you, isn't she? Over in America. She's like your American super fan.
oh, Lynn is lovely. She's been a real fan of the Ruth books and just supportive of me generally. And I was lucky enough to meet Lynn in person a couple of years ago, which was absolutely lovely. So yeah, we've become good friends, which is a great thing, isn't it? Books can bring you good friends.
We've got Steve Munoz on the stream as well, who's
Oh, hi, Steve.
another American member and a fan of yours, because he posted a picture of one of your books signed, I think, earlier in
Oh,
the...
yes, he did. Yes, that's so nice.
Lynn wants to know if you think of Elly and Dom as different people.
Not consciously, although sometimes I say I think Ellie's a bit taller because I'm not terribly tall, I'm 5'2", and I maybe, if I'm kind of going on stage, if you like, as Elly Griffiths, I feel a bit taller. I don't know why, and so maybe it does help with things like that, with doing, you know, as I was saying, I normally do quite a lot of live events, which I actually love, but maybe it does help thinking of us as a slightly different person. So maybe a little bit, but not really. I mean, nobody in my, you know, ordinary life calls me Ellie. I'm Dom to everyone, Domenica, or Dom to everyone. So I don't really think of them as different people. But and I've got a niece called Ellie, so I suppose in the family, obviously, she's the Ellie. I did ask her before the books came out. She reminded. She said she didn't. So I don't consciously think of them as different people. Maybe a little bit, and maybe thinking back to when I was published as Domenica De Rosa, I think a bad review on your own name is worse than a bad review under your pseudonym. But probably conversely, a good review as Domenica De Rosa probably felt more personal than a good review as Elly Griffiths. I don't know if that makes sense, but so maybe I'm a little bit detached from it.
What do your family think of your writing?
Well, I mean, they're very supportive. My husband, as I was saying, Andy, he's an archaeologist, so he's kind of helpful with a lot of the research. Have to say, he doesn't read the books. He doesn't read the books. He says he's read the first couple. I'm not sure that he has. He's not even read the ones that are dedicated to him, even though he is a great reader and he loves crime. Ian Rankin's his favourite writer. They're just not his sort of thing. And in a way, that really suits us because we've been married 29 years, happily married. But if he read one of my books, he would think that I would want a critique of it. He would think that I would want him to tell me what was wrong with it, and I really wouldn't. So that's fine. I've got two grown-up children, twins who are 22, Alex and Juliet, both at university, Alex studying music, Juliet studying zoology, and they are very supportive and they've read the books and they know what to say. It's like Andy says, I wouldn't know what to say, but all you have to say is, it's great, I love it. What's wrong with that? I've got two, my parents sadly both dead. My dad died before I had anything published, which I'm very sad about, but my mum was super supportive and wrote herself. And that's why I love the Justice books so much, writing them, because Justice is kind of my mum. I've got two older sisters who are very, very supportive and I think proud of me. One is an ex-head teacher, Julia, and Sheila's an artist. And without giving too much away, Sheila's a printmaker, and she was very helpful with the Lantern Men, which features some kind of mad artists. And she was very helpful with
that. But she's not a mad artist.
She's not a mad artist. She's a really good artist. If you Sheila De Rosa is her website, and she does amazing printing, and she with all sorts of different techniques. And during lockdown, she's been experimenting with all sorts of natural materials and things. So it's really, really worth looking her up. She's very inspirational and not mad, only a bit.
So this is one of my favourite questions to ask you, but would you write spin-off novels about the characters in the Ruth series? You know, I want a Cathbad one.
Well, I know you and David have suggested a Cathbad one. I wouldn't count it out because the books start with the Crossy Places. 10 years before, there's been this dig where Ruth first came to Norfolk and she first met Eric, who was her sort of mentor, and Cathbad was involved in that dig. So there is a bit of a prequel that could be told, I think. And I would quite like to write something about Cathbad, you know, whether it's a short story or something like that. I did once write a short story from the point of view of Flint, Ruth's cat, and I wouldn't mind doing that again. So yeah, I'm not counting it out, really. I'm not counting it out.
Cathbad's quite good, isn't he? Because he can bring a sort of a vehicle to the books that's a little bit different because of his different beliefs.
I think that's right, and I think that is, talking on sort of Halloween night about sort of the other and the sort of uncanny and the sort of strange in the books. He is a vehicle for that, because on one hand he's a druid and he absolutely believes in these druidical powers and in natural magic and things like that. He's also brought up a Catholic, as I was, and as quite a lot of my characters seem to be. So he kind of believes all that too. And so it is a way of exploring that. I think early on in the series, I decided that although I would always want to have this sort of mythology, and one of the wonderful things about Norfolk actually is there's so much amazing local mythology in the Lantern Men. Obviously, the myth of the Lantern Men, these dark figures who cross the marshes at night, holding flickering candles. But in the new one, the Nighthawks, is about the legend of the Black Shuck, this devilish black dog that appears in Norfolk to people, and it's usually quite a bad sign if it appears to you. But early on I decided that although I would have these in the books, the solution to the murder or the crime would never be supernatural. So there would always be an actual solution to the murder, but the some of the background would be supernatural. So I think for me, I felt that it might be a bit of a cop-out if it was like, oh, the ghost did it. Not to say that I mind books that have that in it, but for me, I decided that the solution would always be completely rational. But you have Cathbad to give you, the other angle and another view on things, which I think we all need sometimes, don't we?
How much research did you have to do on Druidry and things to make Cathbad so real?
Oh, well, thank you. I did do some research. I have a friend who's a Druid, a woman friend, and she is very helpful. And also, kind of because of her, I wanted to always treat his views with a lot of respect. And so I wanted to find out more about them. There are lots of things online and books you can read and things like that. And of course, I live in Brighton, which has quite a lot of alternative thinkers, let's say. And one of the interesting things that always interests me about archaeology is it's one of the sciences. Is it even a science, or it's something? It's a profession that combines really intense science and geology, also history, but also a slight otherworldly sense, because archaeologists are always trying to recreate the past. And I know that on digs that Andy's been on, and Andy, I have to say, is completely atheist and has no sort of beliefs of any sort, but he's been on digs where in the morning they've always start the first day at sunrise and they give thanks to the earth, and the last day is always at sunset where they again give thanks to the earth. And so there is that element of new age thinking in archaeology that maybe isn't in other sort of scientific disciplines. So I really liked that, because I thought it was such a good combination of things, isn't it? Because you can have all the forensic or the isotope analysis or the DNA analysis or the carbon-14 testing and all that that's kind of sort of quite hard. And then again, you can just have even sort of world famous archaeologists like Francis Pryor will say things like, I just sense this is the case, which is, really interesting. I teach creative writing at a place called Westdean, which is famous for, amongst other things, clockmaking. And I remember the clockmaking guy said, there's only so much you can teach about clockmaking. Some of it you just have to sense. And he said, archaeologists are really good at it.
Yeah, interesting.
Interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
You teach that. That's like an amazing creative writing MA, isn't it? Because it's got you on it, Leslie as well, so it's a proper kind of range of great crime authors.
Oh, thank you for saying that. Yes, so Leslie Thompson is a really good friend of mine, brilliant writer, brilliant teacher, teaches on it. Also Mark Radcliffe, who's a really great writer, not a crime writer, but brilliant writer. Mick Jackson, another so it does actually have a lot of people who are still writing and sort of very involved. It is a really good, and West Dean is West Dean, I should have said earlier on, probably is also a big influence for the school in Stranger Diaries, because it's a beautiful place. It's a manor house in the middle of the country. If anyone ever comes to West Sussex, Len, when you're in England next, we'll go there. So it's a manor house in the middle of the country, but it was once owned by a guy called Edward James, who was a big patron of the Surrealist movement. So it's full of surreal art. So you go down a corridor and there's suits of armor and, I'm afraid, lots of dead animals. And then suddenly there's a Dali telephone. You know, it's really weird mix of things. And in the Stranger Diaries, there's a spiral staircase, which is embedded with footprints of a dead woman. And there is that actual staircase at West Dean. So we also teach, Leslie and I have just started teaching a crime certificate. So it's not a whole MA, it's just 3 weekends and you get this sort of crime writing certificate. Not a crime certificate, a crime writing certificate. You get that at the end of it. So have a look if you're ever in West Sussex, because it is a fab place to study. I also teach on an MST at Cambridge, actually, which I still find quite amazing, that Cambridge only started teaching English in 1930. And
Really?
then now you can do a crime writing MST, and that's with Sophie Hanno, who's another fab writer. So yeah, both those are great fun to teach on.
Did that help you with the setting when Ruth goes to Cambridge?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yes, having sort of taught at Cambridge, although, you know, only as a sort of visiting lecturer. Yeah, and I didn't go to Cambridge. I went to King's College London, which is kind of quite a old university, but nothing like Cambridge. Yeah, so that was quite helpful, really. And I've also got a very good friend who is a lecturer, now a dean, actually at Portsmouth Uni now, and she's super helpful for telling me the inside. You know, I just write to her and I say, Mary, what would Ruth be doing? And she's so good. She's read all the books. Well, at this time of year, Ruth will be doing this. So I've been pleased that people have said the academic stuff feels quite true to life.
There's I went to Leeds University, which isn't really old or very
lovely uni though.
It is lovely, yeah. But there's an old medical school that apparently was the first one outside of London.
Oh wow!
That's still used today. It's kind of in the grounds of the hospital, and it's got like little turrets and like rickety old staircases and things. Oh. And when I was like reading the bits about her in Cambridge, that's kind of the places I was envisaging, something like.
Yes, I bet my daughter's best friend Monique is actually studying medicine at Leeds. So I'll ask her about that. But at King's as well, there's very old bits, and there's the Maugham Library, which is kind of a famous old library. It's often actually on TV, and they claim it's Oxford, Cambridge, everywhere, but it's actually at King's. So I did slightly think of that a little bit.
There's a question from my dad. He says he loved the King Arthur element in The Dying Fall. I know that's his favourite Ruth book.
It is his favourite, yeah.
He says it's so credible. Where did it come from?
Oh, thank you, David. It's one of my favourites, I have to say. Well, I don't know how much I can kind of give away about it, but interesting. Mary Beard, David, was recently on Twitter talking about exactly this, which I had in my book, exactly this sort of twist in my book, which I suppose I just say the twist is that, you know, not all ancient Romans were white, and that is absolute fact. We know that from analysis of DNA of soldiers at Hadrian's Wall and things like that. Of course, it absolutely winds up any white supremacists that happen to be out there, but it actually happens to be a fact. Of course, ancient Britons weren't white either. So, you know, it seems to come as a surprise to some people. So it started with that. It actually started with a good friend of Andy's called Dr. Matt Pope, who is an archaeologist, really good archaeologist at UCL. And he was sort of saying about how that there is a kind of offshoot of sort of pagans called neo-pagans, who are very you know, terribly racist and white supremacist. And I thought, well, what if they came in contact with, what if they came up against the unpalatable truth that ancient Britons weren't all white? So that's where that came from. I've always been interested in King Arthur as well, and I love the novels of Rosemary Sutcliffe. And she, in The Lantern Bearers, for example, sort of suggests that King Arthur might have been a Roman Briton, still in Britain after the Romans had left. So that's kind of, it all sort of came together to make the plot of Dying Fall. And also I was able to write about Blackpool Pleasure Beach, which I've wanted to write about for a long time. And I did my scariest bit of research for that book, which was go on the Big Dipper on the roller coaster. Have you been on it, Caroline? You like roller coasters, do you?
No, not really.
It's horrible. I wouldn't go on it. I don't understand why people do them. I don't understand why people do it, but I did because it comes into the book. Andy and I did go on it, and it's quite funny because we've got the fridge magnet, as you do on our fridge, and it shows us on the roller coaster, and we are at the front, and we're doing this. And the people behind us, they're like looking at their nails. They're quite calm. They're not even scared. What's wrong with people? It was terrifying.
I think I've only ever been to Blackpool once.
Ah,
shocking considering I live in the north.
Well, you see, it's Yorkshire, Lancashire, isn't it? You know, maybe that's why. It's a War of the Roses.
Maybe. Lynn says she collects King Arthur books.
Oh, Lynn, that's another link between us. So interesting. The whole, and I'm sure Lynn, when I was younger, I read The Once and Future King. T.H. White, such a really good imagining of the King Arthur story. So yeah, I love King Arthur. I love all those sort of things.
And Steve,
but somebody loves roller coasters. Is that Lynn? Does she love roller coasters?
No, it's Steve.
Oh, Steve. Well, some people do, Steve. Some people do. And in fact, Andy does, even though he didn't much like this one. But if you're ever in Blackpool, it's called the Big One. Oh, my goodness, it's absolutely terrifying. We also went another one, and they said, like, they're really proud of it. Oh, this is the oldest roller coaster in the world. And why would you want to go on an old roller coaster? No, thank you.
That's brilliant. Do you take Ruth to Italy at some point as well, don't you?
Yeah, so in book 10. So I tried not to, you know, because the books are set in Norfolk, and Norfolk is a really big part of it. And, you know, but I did think when I was writing Ruth 10 that I'd been writing about her for 10 years, and she'd never been on a holiday apart from that one time to Blackpool. So I did take her to Italy, and part of the book is set in Italy. As I think I said earlier on, I'm half Italian. My dad was Italian, and we've got a little house, a little family house in Italy, which is in a place called Fontana Liri Superiore. And actually at the bottom of the valley, there is a place called Fontana Liri Inferiore, which I always think is quite funny. So it's a little it's in Lazio between Rome and Naples, and it's a little hilltop town. So that town is recreated faithfully in Dark Angel, so that, which is Ruth 10. So it really is based on the little town. And again, there's some very interesting, Andy's been quite involved in some interesting archaeology that went on around there. And it's an area that it's near Monte Cassino, so there's a lot of fighting in the Second World War, but it's just an area that's been fought over a lot, and by the Roman and the Italic tribes, who were the tribes who were there before the Romans and who fought with the Romans and then had alliances with them, things like that. So that all happened in the Liri Valley, which is this area. So yeah, so some people, you know, some people are always going to complain if you take your characters away from their usual milieu, but sometimes it's fun. I remember somebody saying to me about just before I wrote Dying Fall, they said, oh, hope it's not going to be like Only Fools and Horses when they go to Las Vegas. And actually, that was my favourite ever, Only Fools. But people don't like the Christmas specials, do they, where people go abroad? So you can't do it too often. But sometimes I think it's interesting. And people behave differently on holiday. And that's what happens in The Dark Angel, when Ruth and Nelson and Cathbad had to work quite hard to make it credible that they were there at the same time, all in Italy. And they do behave differently.
And it has one of the best openings I think I've ever read.
Oh, thank you. It
really creepy.
Was super fun because quite often you have to read, you know, aloud at an event, and I have to say those first 2 pages were quite fun to read. So yes, thank you.
I'm sure, like, a lot, you get asked this a lot, but is there an end in sight to the Ruth series? Do you have an ending planned?
You know, for a long time, there wasn't. For a long time, I didn't really know what was going to happen at the end. And in a way, I think that's been quite good for the books because, of course, it's like life, you know, you don't know. And so everything's possible. And some things are not possible. But now, so I've just written Ruth 13. I think that in Ruth 14, which will end, so Ruth 13 so happened to be 2019. Ruth 14 will be 2020. And I think I will do lockdown. I mean, I can understand some writers not wanting to, but I think because I'm writing a kind of realistic-y series set in real time, and also I must admit it's quite tempting. So I've got a bit of an idea what's going to happen at the end now. I have to say I have.
Because you have a locked room style mystery, can't you? Like a lockdown mystery.
It's a massive locked room, isn't it? So interesting, and you know, and also we know some awful things have been happening in lockdown. For example, domestic violence and terrible crimes happening behind closed doors. So I think there is that aspect to it that I will explore in this book.
Lynn's response.
Haven't written it yet. I hope it's not too. My working title is Closure.
Ooh. Lynn's response to that was no.
Oh, Lynn, you know. Well, you know, I'm not going to say anything, but you know, Ruth Nelson lockdown. I thought you'd like that.
Could Kate have a sibling?
But they might.
Have you ever thought, so you know how Peter May has a Hebrides book and Anne Cleeves has a Shetland book? You ever thought about doing a Norfolk one with all the locations that you've used?
Yeah, that's I really like Peter May's books, don't you? And he's another Quercus author, actually. And I have talked about it because, in fact, Peter May and I had for a long time, the same sales guy, really brilliant chap called Ron Beard, who looked after all our sales. And he was a big motivator behind Peter May's book about the islands. And of course, Val's done one about Scotland too. And Ron was always saying, you've got to do Ruth's Norfolk. And I've got a couple of friends there I've got a friend who's a really good photographer, someone else who's a local historian. So I think one time I really would like to do it. I really would like to do Ruth's Norfolk. Gerald's Bookshop, which is an independent bookshop in Norwich, who have been super supportive of the books. They did a little leaflet once, Ruth Norfolk, and sort of pointed out various places, which I think was quite successful. So yeah, one day I think I will do that. It'd be fun, wouldn't it?
It would. And it's so good for people who want to go and visit.
Yeah.
The
you
places
can
that
do
you've written
the
about.
tour. You know, you can go to Walsingham, you can go to Barrow Castle, you can go to, you know, Reedham, King's Lynn, all those places, Home Next to the Sea, Wells Next to the Sea. Yeah, you can do the Ruth tour.
So Lynn says she likes the idea of it being written in lockdown, but not the series ending.
Well, okay. It might not be an end, might just be a pause. I don't know. Haven't really thought about it, but all I can say is I can see an ending now, which I couldn't before. Might take me a while to get to it.
Any plans for standalones? Because all of your books seem to end up being series. This is great, by the way. We love it.
Isn't it funny, though? So when I wrote Stranger Diaries, was absolutely meant to be a standalone. And I have to say, always a big name-droppy thing coming now. But when Val McDermott's always been super supportive of me and of my books. And when she read it, she ran me up and she said, this is the start of a series you're going to write about. Oh, this is the start of a series. It's my Val voice. Sorry, Val, if you're listening. This is the start of a series, she said. You're going to write more about Harbinder. And I said, oh, I don't know. And she said, oh, no. She said, she's going to want to be in another book. And that's what's happened. She's in Postscript Murders. And so I do want to write another standalone. And I haven't in my own mind decided whether Harbinder, so it might be like a whole new, because the Postscript Murders in a sense is a standalone because a whole new cast of characters. Just that Harbinder is the detective investigating the murder. So I might do that again. I'm not sure, but certainly do have plans for another standalone. Yeah. And maybe one with because as you said in the beginning, the Stranger Diaries had that short story running through it. And Postscript Murders has a sort of literary theme about Golden Age murders. So it might have a literary theme, I think. So in a way, it'll sort of fit in.
Is there going to be more Harbinder? Because she's great. I
think I might have to write another, because also, again, I'm not going to give too much away, but there's things I think that need to happen for her. So I think one more Harbinder book, yeah.
How much more difficult is it to get into the head of Harbinder? Because she's very different, isn't she? To Ruth.
I don't find it very difficult getting into heads of different characters. So in Postscript Murders, there's Harbinder, there's Natalka, who's the Ukrainian carer, there's Benedict, who's the ex-monk, now runs a coffee shop, and there's Edwin, who's an 80-year-old ex-BBC producer. So none of them are me, do you know what I mean? But I really enjoyed being in all their heads, and I do like that. But having said that, I do take quite seriously the responsibility of writing about a character. So Harbinder is gay, Sikh, from a Sikh family, Punjabi Indian, so all things that I'm not. And I do want to treat her, you know, ethnicity and background with a lot of respect, to try and get it right. And in that respect, I was very, very lucky, because I had two wonderful Sikh women who were sort of my sensitivity readers. One's called Harpreet Kaur, is almost the same name, and her mum Balvinder, who read it and sort of said things like, well, I'm not sure they'd say that, I'm not sure they'd do that, but, oh yeah, this is exactly what they'd do. So what her mum would do, for example. So yeah, Balvinder was really great on the mum. So yeah, in some ways I think, you know, to be honest, I am a middle-aged white middle-class writer. If I wrote a book who has really only ever lived in Brighton and London, if I only wrote about myself, it would be super boring. So, you know, you have to write about other characters, because God knows there are enough middle-class white women in literature. But I think when you do, then you do have a responsibility to try and get it as authentic as possible. So I hope that's what I've done.
What gives you all the inspiration for your stories?
All sorts of different things, really. You know, thank you, B says I look nice in the hat. Hello, Lucy Enemy. All sorts of different things. With the Ruth books, it's very much the place that comes first. So I might sort of see a place, you know, I said the first book started with a marshland, with the Walsingham book started with visiting the Abbey, you know, in the sort of dying light of the day. And so often starts with the place with the Ruth books. With the Stevens and Mephisto, the Brighton Mysteries, it's very much been those sort of theatrical clues, you know, like I've seen a playbill, or I've thought of Brighton Hippodrome, walking past Brighton Hippodrome gave me the idea for the Vanishing Box, for example. So it's often a place, and then the characters sort of walk into the place. Sometimes you do get a character. I'm not sure where Harbinder came from, but I remember somebody once saying to me, follow the feet. So as a writer, you do sometimes have a character just turn up in your head, and you have to look down, see their feet, where are they going, what are they doing, and just follow them, see what they're doing. So it's all sorts of things, really. Can just be the slightest overheard comment or something like that. I remember when I was researching a Ruth book, going to Walsingham, and there was a woman priest sort of hurrying through the grounds at night, and I thought, what's it like to be a woman priest in Walsingham? And that's what gave me the idea for that book. So it's these little half glimpse things. Often when I'm on a train, I got the idea for the justice books on the train, because you're something about being on a train. I think maybe I haven't been on for ages, but you know, whizzing through the countryside, you see something that's half glimpsed, and you think, oh yes, I could write about that.
We're coming up to the end of our time.
Wow, how has that happened?
I know, it's been so good. Do you want to give everyone a reminder about you and your novels before we go off?
Hi, yes. Well, thank you for listening. It's been so much fun. And thank you, Caroline, for the interview. I'm Elly Griffiths. I'm the author of the Dr. Ruth Galloway books, the Stevens and Mephisto books. Thank you for reminding me of those, Caroline. The Justice books, which are for children, and a couple of standalones, including The Stranger Diaries, which starts on Halloween, and The Postscript Murders, which is the new one. Lovely cover, isn't it? So thank you so much. If you've read any of my books, and if you haven't, what's stopping you?
I know, go and download them now. And if you haven't had enough of Elly, she's joining us again next Sunday for a YA panel
to talk about children's books. Really, really looking forward to that.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Caroline. Thanks, everyone.